pasado no se debe recordar. Fui la ilusión de tu vida, un día lejano ya. Hoy represento el pasado, no me puedo conformar. Hoy represento el pasado, no me puedo conformar. Si las cosas que uno quiere se pudieran alcanzar, tú me quisieras lo mismo que 20 años atrás. Con qué tristeza miramos un amor que se nos va. Es un pedazo del alma que se arranca sin piedad. Es un pedazo del alma que se arranca sin piedad. Cosas que uno quiere se pudieran alcanzar, tú me quisieras lo mismo que 20 años atrás. Con qué tristeza miramos un amor que se nos va. Es un pedazo del alma que se arranca sin piedad. Es un pedazo del alma que se arranca sin piedad.
Óigame, compay, no deje el camino por coger la vereda. Sí, señor. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Meeting Masters, Insights from BizBash's 10 Most Innovative Meetings. My name is Claire Hoffman. I am the executive editor of BizBash, as well as your host and moderator for today's event. We're so excited to have the opportunity to partner with Bevy today. So every year for the last 11 years, the BizBash editors have had the honor of selecting 10 inspiring meetings, conferences, and other business gatherings to feature on this coveted list. Our 2021 list is slightly unique. It's compiled of entirely virtual and hybrid events, which, as you all know very well, has led to the type of innovation our industry has rarely seen before. So today you're going to hear from some of the imaginative minds behind these creative gatherings. Be sure to take notes. As we dive into today's discussion, I encourage the audience to add any questions into the chat. We'll address them during the last 15 minutes of the event. Also, immediately following discussion, we will be opening up networking tables. So join us to meet other event industry professionals and discuss the future of virtual, hybrid, and in-person events and how community can play a critical role in the future. So you can navigate to the networking tables in the top navigation bar. So let's get to it. For our first panel, we will be discussing strategies for building virtual worlds that feel just as impressive as IRL. Let's meet our panelists. First, I want to introduce Shannon Gurley, Senior Director of Design and Business Development at Blueprint Studios. Shannon, the Blueprint team, and other partners are responsible for planning 2021's first Storage SKO, a virtual employee engagement experience where employees are animated islands, each of which represented a different aspect of the company's culture. And the second member of our panel is Sean Parsons. He is the Director of Design and Production of Shiraz Creative. So Shiraz was an integral part of hosting Avalara Crush City Virtual, the future of global tax compliance. This 3D virtual event was designed to look like a massive, colorful city. It was broken into 18 different neighborhoods, each focused on a different industry or offering, which allowed attendees to choose their own adventures based on what was most relevant to them. Sean and Shannon, welcome. Thank you guys for being here.
Hi, Claire.
Hello, thank you. Hello.
Sorry, my screen is a little frozen. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm going to carry on and hope that things are okay. Sean and Shannon, both of you had the opportunity this last transform live events into exciting, complex online experiences. What were the main elements you focused on to elicit the same emotions from attendees that they would get in a live setting?
Shannon, would you like to go first?
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Sean, so much. We're having an SNS morning. So hello, everyone. Welcome to virtual events, right, Claire? And, for us, it was really, we had to take it from a creative angle. That is our approach to everything that we do, whether it's an in-person event or a virtual event. So luckily, we had a fantastic client we could work with that just really let us go crazy. And all of the team, the entire team that came together to just put these sort of ideas on paper, from napkin sketches to you name it. It sort of built it upon itself. And the approach, again, that we took is from a strategic point of view is what were the attendees sort of going to experience, not only from the pre-communications to at-home activities to online to post-event, all those things you would think about for a live event, we wanted to sort of take into the accounting for a virtual event. All right, Sean, now you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And there's some great points as well from Shannon. I think they're kind of orientated around the same way, and it comes down to the same levels of interaction that you have or are sometimes overlooked in a physical event. So it's the affirmation of the person that's sat next to you. It's also it's that engagement from the different sensorial touch points that you have within a physical event and how you carry them over within virtual. It maintains the conversation to the brand in a way that makes the activation the most that it can be. I suppose that was.
Hey everyone, I'm so sorry. I think I'm completely frozen. If you can hear me, I'm closing out and coming right back.
Yeah, you're fine.
We can hold down the fort, right, Sean? So let's talk about what's next on the agenda. We can talk about how I was looking at your project and it looked really amazing with all the different cities and neighborhoods that the attendees could navigate through. How did you approach that? I was curious about that myself.
I think we were very lucky to have a brand that have also been engaged in live events, much like ourselves as a company. So the pivot to virtual was quite a seamless one because everyone wants to get back to the physical. So as much as we can, bring the virtual to the physical realm within the touch points that we're allowed to abide within the different platforms. That's kind of how we played it out. But I see Claire's back now.
Yes, I am so sorry, guys. Of course, this happens to the host. As we all know with virtual, these things can happen. I was totally frozen. It sounds like you both had a great answer to the first question. I didn't hear it, but I trust that you guys were great. But I am back. So what really stood out to me about these two events was this amazing sense of discovery. And apologies if you've already talked about this in the first question. But attendees could, for the most part, explore on their own time the areas that really interested them. There were a bunch of surprise and delight moments along the way. Can you guys describe your thinking there and why these choose your own adventure format was so effective for virtual events?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you take into account your audience, right? So I think the biggest thing for us is really understanding, you probably would go a different route if this were maybe a medical conference or maybe, you know, event about sort of cars or tractors. But with this particular event, it was about technology in particular. And we knew that the attendees would want to be a little bit more adventurous from sort of a technical approach or a virtual approach. And so from that, give us a foundation to sort of decide, how much personal navigation did we want to give them versus curated. And so whether it was activities that we provided them and their families at home to the actual live virtual event, we wanted to just give them just enough that felt like that they were fulfilling their 3 days worth of information, that they could take that information, retain it. They felt like they had their own sense of discovery, but they were also being navigated to specific content and information that was really important for them to retain for the next year. So that's a really delicate approach that you almost have to sort of take case by case, in my opinion. That's for sure.
Sean, what's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I actually take a lot from what Shannon was saying there. They're all very clear and clever points. I think for us, it's we kind of like make very bespoke offers, but I think when we bring it back down to the very raw and visceral experience of engaging with brands, it's the element of the unknown, it's the new and the engaging. So like very common behavioral science shows us that we're still children running around a playground trying to find hidden gems and treasure troves. So we pepper our experience with as many hidden gems and a very widely mapped artifacts that you can find that engage very specific subject matter experts or industries or services to the brand. By outlaying them in the same format as what we've seen with what we did with Avalara, it maintains that like continuous phase of discovery for the users.
That's great. And Sean, your team kept the content available to attendees for a month afterwards, correct? What was the thinking there? Do you think that's a best practice for virtual?
I think that would be best practice for a physical event. I think when it comes to virtual events, we're not held by the cost that comes with the real estate with activations. We have an opportunity within virtual events to store and remember our past experiences. I see no reason why virtual events can't be combined with brands to make evergreen platforms for new consumers to engage with, but also for the client themselves to continue to grow from and measure with.
For sure. Shannon, something you and I talked about that I really loved with the Pure Storage event. You alluded to this earlier, but the family-friendly collateral that was mailed to all attendees. So kind of tucked between sponsor info and agenda materials. There was a custom comic book, stickers. There was even an event mascot. Do you feel like accommodating guests' home lives, being very aware that they may have their kids at home, was that an important thing to you guys?
Well, this past year, especially, yes,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, it was one of the questions that came up a lot in sort of internal polling of attendees, and what do you want to see out of this event? And that was really important to be just cognizant of what their at-home life would be. So I think it's really important to be incredibly flexible in these next few years moving forward. And again, understanding that an attendee journey doesn't start when the doors open. It starts before all of that pre-event communications. What do you want to tell them before? What do you want to get them excited about? And then, how much can you actually engage with them at home too? Because Tashawn alluded, there's so much information out there nowadays that, we almost have to sort of schedule our time between when we're sort of learning things and when we're engaging in, real life activities, and what can we sort of bring our families and friends in on. It's a constant sort of balancing act between work and play and all of those things. So yes, absolutely, it's important to consider at home attendee experience.
For sure. And for any listeners who may not have the budget or the technical know-how to pull off something as large and complex as these events that you guys are talking about, what do you think are the most important things to boil it down to? What are some of the takeaways and lessons learned that you think can be scaled for any budget? Essentially, what should the main goal and purpose of a virtual event be?
I have a very unique position on this because I think we're always looking at metrics nowadays. How do we quantify success? What sort of metric system are we using to sort of gauge, polling and et cetera? Having those one-on-one conversations or live conversations like this, or asking your attendees or asking your clients live, what do you need? Don't rely on these metrics solely to sort of, help sort of drive what you're going to do next, because I think that's a little bit of what's missing right now. We're so reliant and dependent on these statistics that we're sort of forgetting that sort of touch point, live touch point with the attendee to sort of make sure that they're still engaged, that we're just not looking at computer data to ensure that we're having success. I don't know if anyone else is here is like this, but my favorite thing about live events is when that door opens and you can actually see people's face go, wow, we can't get that with virtual events really yet. Maybe in the future we'll actually be able to see attendees' faces when this sort of computer screen opens to this fantastical world. But that sort of personal connection, I think, is one thing that we really need to be considerate of moving forward.
I agree to what you're saying there, Shannon, as well. I think, virtual events in the time of when we needed them extended the footprint of that of which we couldn't obtain within physical events. I think, as long as anyone who's looking to do this, they use scalable ideas that outreach the consequence of any virtual interactions. And I think there's a lot of ways in which we can keep bringing in this the levels of interaction to the virtual, which comes straight from the physical. And I think combining that new way of thinking, it will never run the creative well dry, if you will.
For sure. And I always love to ask people as we start getting back into safe live events. I know you both have some exciting stuff coming up. Shannon, I think you said you had a big event tomorrow for the San Francisco Symphony. And Sean, I know Shiraz has been doing some incredible stuff. I'm getting constant emails from you guys about very cool things you guys are doing. Are there any lessons you've learned over the last 18 plus months from the world of virtual that you really are carrying with you as live events return?
I would say that they are one and the same thing. All we're doing with virtual is discovering how we facilitate virtual with our knowledge of physical. They always have been linked to each other. We've just never had the opportunity where we've had to look so closely at virtual events and try and bring them so closely to our physical live events. So I would just keep in the back of your mind that they're one and the same thing. We're just discovering how and why they are.
What about you, Shannon?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Sean is saying. On a personal level, I will tell you that I forgot how much high heels hurt going back to a live event. So, now we're going back into the live space. I'm going, wait, I can't do this in my slippers. So I really think it's going to take a lot of really creative thinking in the next few months and years to sort of get people comfortable. There's going to be all kinds of levels of comfortability, you know, in spacing and masking or vaccinated or not, or what have you. I think so. There's even more work for us to do. Whether we're doing, you know, live, hybrid, or virtual, or combination, is really just being, again, considerate of all those different types of peoples, of attendees, that all the experiences that we need to ensure that they have. But the biggest thing is, what is the message that they need to retain at the end of that event? And so that should be the primary focus. But again, those heels, man, forget it.
I know. And do both of you have any hybrid plans in the future? Do you see hybrid as sticking around for a long time?
We're working with a couple of companies at the moment where we're looking on a few strategies. We're very much looking at it to help improve or make the buck go further, if you will, by extending the footprint of that of which sponsors may not be comfortable enough to invest in at the moment. There's ways and there's mechanisms which we've realized through the virtual in which we can still bring a level of engagement from clients to consumers alike, without any more expense or without any more risk. So I think the learnings that we've obtained and the platforms in which we've been able to manage are going to benefit us, you know, going into the future exponentially.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I don't think that we would ever take this off the table moving forward. There's a lot of really great opportunities, especially I think trade show for us is a big one. You know, when you're talking about a global trade show and people traveling all over the world to go attend, even from a sponsor's point of view, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for a virtual portal in which people could actually communicate and connect with information or content on trade show in a virtual portal versus having to be there as well. So I don't see it going away. I only see it expanding even more and more.
For sure. Well, we are just about out of time, but I'm so excited for this quick chat with you guys. I feel like in 20 minutes we had so many little amazing nuggets. I hope everybody's been taking notes. Be sure to head to the full story on bizbash.com to see some great photos from these events. These two pulled off some of the coolest virtual events I've ever seen. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time today and sharing your insights for the story. So that wraps up our first panel. Oh, sure.
Thanks for having us, Claire, and thanks for doing the really cool, you know, just showing everybody, you know, things can happen in the virtual world, and it's okay. No damage done, and we're still rolling with it. It's good.
For sure.
Thank
I think
you,
we've
Claire.
all adapted incredibly. So again, thank you both. And I look forward to diving into some audience questions with you guys a little bit later when we bring everybody together. And
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Bye-bye. What an insightful panel that was. And the best part is we're just getting started. Apologies again for my tech issue. As a reminder, please continue to add your questions into the chat we will address them in the last 15 minutes of the event when we bring everybody back on stage. And don't forget to join our networking tables after the event as well to meet with other event industry professionals. You can navigate to the networking tables in the top navigation bar. All right, so in our next panel, we will discuss the secrets of keeping audiences engaged, which I know is a very hot topic right now and has been throughout the pandemic. So I'm thrilled to introduce this super insightful panel of experts we have here. First up, we have Judy Lee, Head of Global Brand Experiences and Programs at Pinterest. So Pinterest hosted Pinterest Presents, the brand's first ever global advertiser summit in March. It was held virtually across 6 countries around the world, and the brand actually worked with a disability activist to ensure that it was fully accommodating and engaging for every attendee. So I'm super excited to hear about that. Next on our panel, we have Mike Kitson, Chief Production Officer of Invent. In 2020, Walmart partnered with Invent to bring their once in-person holiday meeting to life in a virtual arena, complete with virtual merchandise booths, an interactive trivia game, a variety of content styles, and other really creative strategies to engage employees around the United States. And last but not least is our panelist, Heather Odendahl, co-founder and CEO of W North Conference, which is a leadership development event for women in North America. Typically held in Whistler, Canada, last year's gathering shifted online and focused on giving attendees year-round education and networking opportunities. So you all bring very different insights to this conversation about the general topic of attendee engagement. So I'm so excited to have you all here. To start, I'd love to just ask a pretty general, but probably pretty loaded question. In a few words, what do you think is the secret of audience engagement, particularly in the virtual world? Whoever wants to start.
Sure, I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. Judy here. And number one, just Sean and Shannon, hard act to follow, but thank you for sharing your wisdom in that earlier panel. You know, where I really think about in terms of engagement, I really think about two things, and I think Shannon touched on this a bit, is one, really thinking about the audience that we're serving and how do we honor them and really understand the world that they're coming from. And then the second thing, you know, that I've really reflected on this past year is the team and the partners that you work with, and how can you really inspire and motivate them and create an exciting vision for what you're embarking on with each event.
Interesting. Mike or Heather, did you have any thoughts on that?
Hey, thanks for having me, Claire. And tough act to follow indeed to the previous panelists. For me, it's customized and curated content, 100%. I concur with everything everyone has said thus far. In fact, a lot of stuff I might say is redundant. But I think the most important thing is understanding individuals' interests and engaging them pretty much. If you're sending an invite 2 months out from the event, engage them then and continue engaging them with teaser campaigns and get them excited about this event. I think that's probably the most important thing. And then having those didactic presentations that are must see and must be live for whatever reason, if it's a message from the CEO or if it's a message to shareholders and it has to be a live segment, that's great. But then it's, as you said before, choose your own adventure or an elective that you select at a college. The great thing about virtual events is it's curated and it's on demand. So at an in-person event, sometimes you want to go to 2 breakouts at the same time and you can't. With virtual, you can, which I think is a game changer with virtual events.
Yeah, definitely. Heather, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, it's about connection. People need to feel connected with the subject. You need to feel connected with the other attendees. And a big part of it is also to feel connected with the speakers. One of the ways that we try to achieve this at W North is, you know, creating some smaller meeting groups or breakouts, really focusing on high interaction between the speakers and the attendees. And then also bringing in like a tangible touch point of, we did an experience box, which we shipped to everybody with female founded companies. And in that we had a, you know, like a virtual connect dinner. So just like having that tangible piece and bringing all of those connections together. So for me, it's connection.
For sure. Another question for all of you, whether this was a brand new event like Judy's or previously an in-person event that you shifted online, what would you say your main goals for the gathering were, and what are some key ways you achieved that in a virtual setting? Judy, did you want to start? Oh, Heather, you can start.
Or no, Heather, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So we had our conference for April 2020 was originally planned in Whistler, Canada. And of course it was canceled. And so a lot of pressure on trying to replicate, you know, what we have with our in-person experience in a resort-like setting with retreat-like elements to a virtual. So for us, it was the objectives we really wanted to do were making sure that the attendees felt connected with the other attendees, as I mentioned before. So, and we accomplished that by launching a brand new online platform and creating year-round experiences for them. And then we also wanted to make sure, because we are a leadership development opportunity for mid-career female professionals. And so leadership development was a key piece. But we also acknowledged that people were at home, many of our demographic at home with kids, and what was an attainable, leadership development opportunity that would keep them engaged. So we created a 6-week course with live masterclasses, and then also that connection with the Connect dinners. So Just through a couple of those touch points, it was, really making sure that they had the development opportunity, they had the access to the speakers, and they had the opportunity to network with other attendees.
For sure. Judy, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, happy to jump in. So Pinterest Presents was the first time we've done this large global summit. And it was really kind of born out of the times. And I think there was this general, like, this isn't something that we've ever done before, but we're like, okay, maybe if we do it digital, it won't, like, we can do all 7 markets at the same time. And I'm still debating about that, if it's actually more efficient or not, as there was definitely a lot of work that went into it. And I still often think about, was it the best experience for our audience, and how do we create amazing programming for it? And so our overall goal, this is tailored to advertisers, and advertisers love events. They love to network, and in pre-pandemic times, there's so many events for the industry, and they love to be entertained. They love to be taken out. And so, we wanted to kind of serve on that while also sharing some upcoming product announcements for the year, and really just creating some buzz for what was to come at Pinterest. And, just building off of what I was saying before, in terms of like, how do we really motivate the team, and how that leads to great audience engagement, is, I think, like many people, not a lot of us had a ton of digital event experience. And so it was really about reframing the opportunity, because what we didn't want to do is just go from IRL to URL, but really think about, how do we create the best experience online for people? And so we reframed it. And what I challenged the team with and shared the vision is, okay, now we're all basically television producers. How do we create 1 hour of amazing, snappy content that will really engage the audience and honor their time? And before, like back in, the IRL days of conferences, it'd be typical to have a 30 to 45-minute session, but we really focused on short, snappy content. And we looked to our A-list talent. I think those were the only folks that really had longer than 10 or 15 minutes. And now, as we're looking ahead to our next big event, which we just announced, our big Creators Festival, that will be launching later this month, we've gone even shorter with a lot of the content that we've been recording and producing. So we think, we want to honor the overall Zoom fatigue and video fatigue and make it really entertaining. And I think I want to touch on something that Sean had said earlier as well, around great experiences are really about appealing to all the senses. And so, similar to what Heather had shared in terms of watch boxes, and just what are those other things, because in a typical video event, you're really just touching on sight and sound, but how can we reintroduce smell? How can we introduce things that you can touch and feel, and maybe even eat and drink? And so we really focused on that with some accompanying boxes as well. And I think that really kind of helped get the audience engaged and get them excited about the overall experience.
Great insights. Thank you. Mike, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll build on what Judy said. I think pre-COVID, PC, a virtual event is very different than what a virtual event is now. In 2019, a virtual event was usually a live stream, or you were doing something on MS Teams, Zoom, WebEx, Skype, those things. It's changed a lot, and you can still have virtual events. Not all virtual events are created equal, right? It's all about, just like walking in a ballroom when you have an in-person event. It could be pipe and drape and projection screens and no bells and whistles, or you could blow it out. It's the same thing with virtual events. You can just have a live stream with minimum functionality like chat and polling, or you could blow it out, which is what Walmart did in September of 2020. The Walmart holiday meeting is unique. Every year in September, again, this is prior to COVID, they would fly every store manager into Bentonville, Arkansas, where they're headquartered, and basically recreate an entire Walmart in a massive conference center. And there would be touch points. They would essentially spend a few days reviewing, strategizing how to bring products to market in their busiest holiday season, right? Starting in October, November, December. So emulating that and duplicating that in a virtual platform was a huge challenge. Number one, this was shortly after, shit hit the fan. Sorry, excuse my French. But, a lot of clients immediately canceled their events. It was a wait and see approach. People didn't know how long the quarantine was going to last. So there were months for many clients where it was just nothing, right? It was just a ghost town because it was a wait and see. So we were approached and partnered with Walmart to develop a platform that, as best as possible, could duplicate what they had live and in person. So they have a great broadcast studio at their headquarters. So we did all the C-suite presentations from their broadcast studio. We made it akin to a news studio. So there are different sections to keep the visuals snappy. There were rotational sessions on demand, as I spoke to earlier. Some managers were very interested in specific brands and specific verticals that sold in their market versus other markets. So that was a choose your own adventure. The Product Expo trade show is by far probably the thing we blew out the most. I think we had over 200 virtual booths. They were sponsored booths. They were staffed booths. So you could actually go to the booths, and if you wanted to have a one-on-one conversation or a group conversation and learn more, you could real time go to the booth, a video window would pop up, and you would actually have a conversation, which we think was really cool. As far as engagement, they had a couple of their employees that were spinning, DJing during the virtual walk-in. There were trivia contests, there were scoreboards, there were prizes awarded. So we really, really tried to engage the audience over these few days. And I will also say, Judy is spot on. The days of an hour-long didactic presentation are gone. So our best practice when we speak to clients is cut any presentation that was in person that's 45 minutes, at the very least cut it in half, if not by 2/3, right? So that's definitely a best practice. And as everyone has spoken to, everyone has screen fatigue. And everyone also, a lot of people are working in offices now, but I would argue probably the majority of people are still working from home. So you have distractions constantly. So short, snackable segments and plenty of breaks. Every hour and a half, give a 15-minute break. Don't go 3 or 4 hours and then give them 30 minutes for lunch. You're going to lose people. That's all I got.
For sure. Yeah, I was going to say BizBash recently hosted a hybrid event end of last month, and we did these short little 10-minute segments, and it was our most popular thing we've ever done. Everybody got so much feedback on that. So I think that's a huge takeaway for the future. I want to spend a little time diving in deeper with each of you. Judy, I think making an event accessible and inclusive is a huge part of effective audience engagement. I mentioned earlier that your team worked with a disability activist. I'd love to hear more about that, what that process was, and why it was important to you.
Yes, I'm excited to jump into this point. But before I do, I just realized I never realized I'd feel nostalgic about the term pipe and drape until Mike just mentioned it. And I'm like, oh, remember those days of pipe and drape? But anyhow, but before I dive in. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And at Pinterest, our mission is to bring everyone the inspiration to create a life they love. And at the core of this, we say inspiration really begins with inclusion. And so, as you mentioned, Sinead Burke was one of our speakers, as well as someone that we ended up working with as we thought about how could we apply some of her learnings. She's an Irish writer and a disability activist. She's also worked with Tom Ford, as well as Vogue in the UK. And if you haven't already seen her TED Talk, she's a great TED Talk all around designing for everyone. And that was really the inspiration of the talk that she gave to our audience, as well as like how we thought about that for our own experience. And so, one of the things she really challenged us on as we thought about the end-to-end experience is like, how do we think from the invitation? And from there, we asked everyone who attended if they needed any accommodations. Now, we don't have limitless budgets, and so I don't know if we could satisfy all of them, but I think just by asking, people really felt included then. And that was a lot of the feedback that we got into that box on our form, that people were just like, wow, this is amazing that you're even asking about that. And so part of, as we kind of went into production, and one of the things we thought about was, all right, let's try to include sign language interpreters. And while our event went across multiple markets, we first started with ASL and BSL, which is American Sign Language and British Sign Language, which I didn't realize it's not a universal language. And a lot of folks who are hearing impaired, they might not be able to, they learn a different language from birth. And so some people might say, well, can't you just do closed captioning? And isn't that enough? And the answer is no. And so, and as we worked with Sinead, something that really struck us that she shared in her talk was, she would get pushback from people when she would ask them to think about that and design a more inclusive experience. And the thing that people would say, well, why bother with that? There's no one in the audience who'll need it. There's no one like that in your audience. But then if we don't start designing to be more inclusive, no one ever will participate who can't hear. And so just let that sink in. It gave me chills when she said it, and we're like, yeah, that's right. And so we worked, and it really, we worked on the timelines, and we had to add in another week to make sure that we could get the interpreters into the overall content program. And then from there, so my experiential marketing lead, he is based in the UK, and he worked with a local organization there called DICE, which stands for Diversity and Inclusion at Conferences and Events. And they evaluated our experience and gave us a 100% score for Printers Presents, which we were so proud of. And we worked with them to really advise on how we can really think about continuing to design for inclusion overall. And then the last point I'll make, it's, we worked with A-list talent like Chrissy Teigen and Dan Levy from Schitt's Creek, and they were part of our whole experience. But I got a lot of feedback about Sinead. And that's where we got a ton of attendee feedback. People wanted to get in touch with her. People wanted to work with her because she had a really provocative call to the industry. And I think that really, really inspired people. And so from that, we were really able to kind of uphold our mission and really think about how we can design for inclusion and inspire people.
I love that. So many good takeaways there. Thank you, Judy. Heather, I'd love to shift to you. You mentioned before your conference relies a lot on connection and networking. I'd love to know you touched a little bit what you did to bring that type of humanity to a virtual setting, and also kind of the year-round engagement opportunities you're offering. I know you guys have a lot going on.
Yeah, so we started the W North Conference in 2015, and by 2018, there was this call from the women leaders that are attending the conference. We want more of this. We want to be able to connect with this community year round. And in 2018, we actually launched our the Members Club at W North, which is our membership. And interestingly enough, we were doing virtual workshops once a month, and in person as well. And 2019 was interesting because from a lot of our community is a mix of entrepreneurs and corporate, and the corporate leaders were not quite adapted to the virtual learning component. So we had all these workshops that we continue to do in our chapter cities, but in came the pandemic, and suddenly people were very much adapted to the online learning experience. So luckily, when the pandemic hit, we already had a base of membership. We already had a platform. We just switched platforms the month of the pandemic. And so we kind of just doubled down on what we were doing already. So and tripled the number of events that we did online. So we now host monthly workshops. We lead leadership masterminds, five people and a facilitated coach. We do 3 cohorts a year. And we also run courses. So there's a number of things that were kind of in the works. And then when we went fully virtual, we really increased the number of programs. And, I think from our perspective, with that challenge that we had in 2019 with adoption to online learning, that actually just accelerated our opportunities during COVID, because we were able to reach more people. And now we have not only members in North America, but all around the world, because we can watch replays outside of time zones, etc. So it's been a huge shift, because we've gone from just being initially a conference to what I believe we are a learning and development and true networking experience for women leaders.
That's great. I think that type of year-round engagement is so important, whether it's a virtual or a live event. Mike, let's spend a little time with you. I know Walmart's holiday meeting was one of the first virtual events that your team worked on during the pandemic, and I know you've done a ton of cool stuff since. I'd love to hear how your philosophy towards virtual events has changed, particularly in the area of audience engagement.
Sure. It's evolved more than changed. I think a lot of best practices that we developed early on, we're just building upon it, right? So the snackable content, choose your own adventure, all that stuff is low-hanging fruit. Sometimes it's a little difficult getting the client there. They have a lot of content and they don't want to get it down to a 20-minute presentation, so we don't always win those battles, to be honest. But I'd like to talk about, the opportunity, particularly where we are technology-wise. We discussed within our company, after 9/11, basically every in-person event was canceled. That's when I started off in the industry, and the internet speed and Wi-Fi capability wasn't there to even try virtual, but we tried, right? We tried. In the financial crisis, 2008-9, same thing. That's the first place that clients get rid of their marketing dollars, like live events, in-person events. So how do we create a virtual event? We tried, the technology wasn't there, the speed wasn't there for people watching from home. We're at a place now, this is kind of a sea change moment, in my opinion. We're at a place now where I think in the next 5 to 10 years, even watching screens as we are now will be a thing of the past. Everyone knows about the Oculus Quest, Microsoft HoloLens. These are technologies that are going to get lighter, more affordable, more practical, and be incorporated into virtual events moving forward. Again, not necessarily in the next few years, but definitely down the road, my personal opinion. Second thing we've learned, for the first 6 months after COVID, the vast majority of broadcasts were from people's homes, right? So they were typically using your computer's webcam, which isn't typically the best quality. You didn't have good lighting, you didn't have good mics. So sending home studio kits was our solution to that. We would send executives and presenters home studio kits that were pretty much self-contained and could be set up, that brought the production value higher. Then we evolved to people being comfortable going to centralized broadcast studio locations, right? So then we could have people in one location with or without a small audience. And from 6 months to a year in, that's where we were. Where we are now, we're going back to in-person events. I just was at, we produced SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management event a few weeks ago in Las Vegas. There were tens of thousands of attendees, and the vast majority were in person. So followed all the COVID protocols, everyone was masked up, and it was an in-person event at a massive scale. You also had to focus and cater to the virtual audience, which was about a third of the attendees. We used all of our best practices from our virtual events, audience interactivity, polling, Q&A, metrics, data points, all that stuff. But we also brought in a couple of MCs, professional MCs, and we opened the doors, both virtually and in person, an hour before the show, and we had a pregame. And we had air guitar contests for the people in the audience and watching virtually. We had Mad Lib contests for people watching virtually, put up on the screen, and it was really, really engaging. I will also say, I said no virtual event is created equal, right? Some clients just have the budget and the need for a live stream. Other clients blow it out on a virtual platform, just like Bevy. I think the future is, and we're doing this with one of our clients, General Motors. We did it this past year for CES. The entire set was extended reality. So I'm not sure if anyone has seen any new show. Mandalorian is a prime example. That's all done. It's not done on green screen. It's done with extended reality. So you have tracking cameras and you can create environments that, at the snap of a finger will switch from a completely realistic backdrops. And that is how we're going to engage as well in the future. And we're working with a number of clients doing extended reality shoots. So extended reality, augmented reality, that's a thing now. And in the future, we're planning on working with a couple of our partners, Epic Games and the Unreal Engine, for example. We're working on with GM. So we're working with them to try to bring that next cutting edge technology that our computers and our Wi-Fi can now actually handle. So it's exciting times. I will say from you know, as the world opens back up, because we are still in the midst of this pandemic, but as the world opens back up, there will be people who are comfortable traveling. There are people who are not comfortable traveling. So hybrid is here to stay. That, in my opinion, is a no-brainer. It's always going to happen, even if it's again just archiving what happened at the event and having it on demand. But it's here to stay.
For sure, I agree with that. And we have about 2 minutes left, and you kind of dove into my last question for you guys. I want to ask you guys the same thing I asked Sean and Shannon. What's the biggest lesson you've learned from virtual that you'll carry with you as live events return, whether that's in terms of audience engagement or anything else? Heather, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, so in my space, I've seen a big shift. I spoke about it a little bit with that virtual learning adoption, and I find from some of the research I've been doing right now is people are the biggest thing that they want to return to in-person events is the networking component. And if there is a learning and development component, it's that it's an interactive experience. And the keynote is still a very powerful tool. But I think that it's going to be a really key balance of how much sitting, listening to somebody in a room without interaction we have in that in person, and what type of pre-materials can we give these people from a learning and development opportunity in advance so that you can double down on the networking in person.
That's a great point. Judy or Mike, did you want to chime in?
Sure. My only kind of, I feel like there's been such great knowledge shared here already by both these panelists and the ones before. But my build would be kind of where we started, which is just empathy and having great empathy, not only for the audience, but the teams that are building the experiences to create that engagement. And I think it's really about how do we motivate people? How do we be empathetic to what may be going on in all the situations? And then obviously, we take that in terms of how do we make it as inclusive as possible and accessible to as many people as we can. I think similar to what Mike had shared, I also believe that hybrid is here to stay. And so definitely thinking about that for the future.
For sure. Thank you. Mike, did you have anything else to add?
I think everything was covered. I would just say if you're working on a virtual platform that has full customization capabilities, embrace the extraordinary. Don't try to duplicate what a hotel ballroom looks like as the registration component. Don't try to duplicate your client's lobby, for walk-in. Make something extraordinary because you have the capacity to. You have great graphics designers and video editors. The sky is the limit. So just go hog wild and push the envelope. I mean, our mantra is challenge everything, and then we do that internally and with our clients. Just challenge it, push the envelope, make meetings a completely different thing than they were a year ago, and we're just along for the ride.
I love that. I think that is a great point to end on. Thank you three so much for joining our panel today. So many amazing insights, and I'm excited to chat more with you guys as we dive into audience questions in just a few minutes. But thank you guys. Thank you. If you were all feeling inspired by now, that certainly makes two of us. I could talk to everybody all day, but I know we got to keep moving. So this event would not have been possible without our partner, Bevy. So next up, I would love to introduce David Spinks, VP of Community at Bevy.
Oh.
Hi, David. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for hosting this amazing event.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Hope everyone's enjoying the platform.
Yeah. So Bevy is the first ever community event engine that focuses on community-led events. Can you tell us more about what that means and how this platform came to be?
Sure, yeah. So the Bevy story is actually a pretty interesting one because it started with community. It started with a community called Startup Grind, which is one of the largest startup communities in the world. There's over 600 chapters that are run by volunteers in cities all over the world. And, when they built out that program, it can be a very tedious process to manage 600 different chapters, event leaders, manage all the data, manage the brand across all those tools and all the different platforms that people are using. And so they ended up building Bevy to solve their own problem of how do you really scale up community-led event programs like that. And that's what turned into Bevy. Bevy started serving other customers, lots of different brands. And now we power these kinds of community-led event programs for, Googles of the world and Salesforce and anyone who's running that kind of program. And now it's just kind of continue to evolve and grow into a full event platform that you can do everything from running virtual conferences and virtual events like these ones to smaller networking groups and smaller gatherings. And when in person does return, and it already has for some local chapters, you can run all of your events through Bevy for in person as well.
Very cool. Community events obviously have a lot of power, especially in today's world where interaction and connection are so important, as a lot of our panelists have mentioned. What do you believe to be the most important features of community-focused events?
Yeah. So there's already been so many good insights from everyone on the panels before. I've just been watching and taking notes of things we want to do in our events. It's interesting though, a lot of the conversation ends up to be focused on the platform and the tools that we can bring. And in the switch to virtual, we've all kind of been scrambling to figure out how do we recreate in-person events. When we talk about community-driven events or events that really center community, a lot of it comes down to the programming and how you connect people to each other, how you connect people to the content. And so at an event specifically, I think it's a lot of how do you facilitate interaction amongst the attendees, not just between you, the content creator, and the attendees responding to you or asking questions, but how do you connect attendees to each other? Even in this event, one of the beautiful things about a virtual event is that attendees can be talking to each other during the content, right? If we did this during an in-person conference, I would be considered rude for talking to someone throughout the entire talk. But now we can have a whole conversation. Attendees are sharing what they've learned and what they've been doing. And so facilitating that, encouraging that's really good. Creating opportunities for smaller discussions. So breakouts into networking groups that I highly recommend having facilitators for each group. So it's not just sending people into their own, but actually facilitating these more private discussions creates more opportunities for people to connect more deeply than when they're just kind of watching the main screen. And ultimately, community comes down to empowering people to create for each other, right? Because us as event organizers, we're not going to be an expert in every topic. We're not going to be an expert in the dynamics of local regions and local cultures around the world. And so if you want to have events that are really personal and really engaging all over the world, then find local leaders who want to raise their hand and self-organize those events. And if you want to bring that kind of more intimate, specific experience to your events, find members of your community who want to raise their hand and facilitate conversations or facilitate a networking group or bring their own expertise and knowledge to the event. Get everyone in the community involved in facilitating the content and the experience of the event. And that's how you can make it much more compelling from a community perspective.
That's a really great point. How do you keep an audience engaged with your brand after an event?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same way you keep people engaged in general, right? You just have to continuously provide value and create opportunities for them to connect and engage with each other. And so just for context, I'm the VP of Community at Bevy. I started a company called CMX, which is the community for community managers. And we were acquired by Bevy 3 years ago and teamed up. And so CMX Summit is our big event. It's how we started. It happens once a year. But I think one of the mistakes that a lot of us fall into when we're coming up with our event programs is we think about the community experience as just the event, like the beginning and the end of the event. When in reality, the way we look at events in the world of community strategy is an event is one single touch point in an ongoing community experience that you want people to have with you. And a conference or a big event is really awesome because it's exciting, the biggest production, the most energy, everyone from the entire ecosystem comes together. But then after that, what are the opportunities for them to continue to engage with each other? So for CMX, we have multiple online communities. We have our Slack group, we have a Facebook group, we have different virtual spaces that people can interact with asynchronously. We as a team are hosting smaller events that we call master classes multiple times a month. And then we empower our community members to self-organize, to be chapter leaders. And we have over 60 chapters around the world now. And each of those chapters are hosting events every month. On top of all the content we publish and all the different things we do to build our community, now what we're providing is essentially a diverse range of experiences that people can come and participate in. And some people will prefer the big conference. Some like the 10-person networking group where they get on a call with each other and all just talk to each other. Some prefer the 1-hour masterclass workshop style events. Some prefer just to participate asynchronously in Slack and Facebook and our different online groups. But by providing people with kind of a range of different ways to interact, you give them multiple opportunities to engage and participate and become deeper members of the community all throughout the year.
So you really believe that your audience has the ability to be influencers for your brand?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's interesting in the world of community. Sometimes, companies can use the term community very freely, whether or not they're actually investing in community. And there's often questions of like, do people really care about your brand? Like, are they really going to be a community member of Salesforce or Google or something? But yeah, like absolutely. Look at Salesforce. They have over 1,000 local chapters all over the world that are completely engaged with their like really ambitious ambassadors who are trying to grow their career and learn how to use the platform, or Google developer groups with over 1,000 chapters of developers gathering all over the world that's completely volunteer run. So I think like what's important to keep in mind is that yes, your brand or your product may be the commonality and maybe the common interest that brings people together. But when somebody becomes an ambassador, it's not just because they love the brand or the product. It might be, right? And for those products, they use them all the time in their lives and their careers consistently. So it's a big part of their life. But the reason people become ambassadors is because it brings them value in some way to become that ambassador. It's probably because they want to be a leader. They want to improve their reputation. They want to learn together. They want to drive their local community forward. And your brand becomes a channel to be able to do that. Right. So if Salesforce gives someone an opportunity to become a really big leader in their industry and improve their reputation, that's a really great way to leverage the brand to turn people into influencers and ambassadors. So it's about thinking about what's the value to the people that are organizing these events. How do you give them more value rather than how do we convince people to promote our brand? I think you just have to flip that thinking.
For sure. That's a great insight. Well, I hope you'll stick around. We're going to bring the rest of the panelists back up because I know we have a ton of audience questions to get through. People have been blowing up the chat. So let's bring everybody back on the stage to answer some of those questions. All right. I have a bunch of questions here to kind of dive through. Did anybody find increased attendance by adopting virtual? Does anybody have a good story there they wanted to share?
I could speak quickly to Walmart's holiday meeting. Typically, when it was in person, it was store managers, but they opened it up since it was a virtual meeting to associate and assistant managers. So the head count grew exponentially. I think it tripled. So I think in most instances, yes, more people will attend virtual.
And
I'd also add to that.
Oh. We got a few. Sean, were you going to say something?
I was just going to add to what Mike's saying. I think for clients, it gives the ability for them through attrition to upscale the attendance. And also for post events, they also have the ability to maintain the numbers and keep growing them. So for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, go ahead, David.
We'll do their hand raise. Just to give some specific stats, like our last in-person conference was 1,000 people. When we went virtual, we reached about 5,000 people that RSVP'd. Obviously, our online event being free the amount of people who actually turned out was less. We see about 60% turnout rate from RSVPs to attendees for free events, which is actually the same as what we would see for free in-person events. So we're not seeing a huge drop off in turnout rate from attendance rate when we move from in-person to virtual. And one thing that's really cool is it's become a lot more accessible. So we've had people from all over the world be able to attend events now that otherwise they couldn't attend because it cost money and they didn't want to travel to the Bay Area before.
And
For
I just
sure.
had
And I mean,
one.
you see like, oh yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Sorry about that. I just had one twist on that because I think, it really depends on the overall goals. I think early on, like the promise of digital events was tonnage and volume and really broad reach. But then I think as the months wore on, what we've also found is that there's a lot of appetite for more exclusive, smaller experiences overall. So we have been kind of weighing both. And I think like our strategy at the beginning of the pandemic definitely was like reach and volume. And I think now we're taking a very like audience specific approach to what people want out of an experience.
That's a great point. Judy, we had another interesting question for you. What criteria does DICE look at when rating an event's inclusiveness? Are you able to share any of that?
Oh boy, I feel like I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can definitely share if you look up DICE and the diversity and inclusion in the UK. I believe they may kind of list out all the different criteria and the scorecard that they go by in terms of how they rank events. So I don't want to misspeak. So definitely check out the website. I think they will have the exact information there.
Yeah, that's a great resource. For anybody, specifically asked to Mike, but anybody who kind of worked on these, what aspects of virtual do you think brands like Walmart or any of the brands you worked with will retain in the future when we get back to in-person? Mike, did you want to kick that one off?
Sure, I can speak to it. Just again, low-hanging fruit, polling, gamification. I know that's an overused word. Q&A, the ability to go into breakouts seamlessly. Some platforms have challenges using Open API and iframes, integrating Zoom and what clients have already approved internally with their IT teams. So I would say at the bare minimum, polling, chat, Q&A, and breakouts. And this is mostly for internal. Consumer is a completely different animal. Yeah.
Does anybody else want to chime in there?
No, I think he hit it right on the head. Great job, Mike.
Okay, good job, Mike. Here's another good question. Given how much staff you need to run great events, what role do you think the overall community, the customers, the employees, can play in helping create, promote, and host events? Do you want to
ask the question again? I don't know if wait, ask that again? I'm not sure.
What role do you think the community, meaning customers and employees, can play in terms of helping create, promote, and host events?
Wow. I can answer to start off at least. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I could at least kick it off. I just think for everything that we were talking, especially David, what he was talking about with the community, I think they are the most integral part of initiating and creating the traction for events, especially virtual events. I think with COVID, there was such a blackout for a lot of companies. It was the community that integrated themselves into the more granular levels. And I think what we've realized is that human interaction is an amazing thing, and you don't need any status to engage in that. So I think all levels are able to engage with virtual. It just depends on the client and the activation, essentially.
All right. Let's get to another one. What is the thinking about integrating AI and machine learning in virtual event platforms in the future? Is that something you all see as sticking around and being effective in the future?
I can speak to this really quickly. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I think you also touched on it earlier, Mike, too, with regards to we're sort of having to learn so many new types of I don't know, businesses and strategies on how we approach events, from XR to AR to AI, all these anagrams that, you're trying to remember, first of all, but the technology that's involved with how we're learning and sort of absorbing information as we move forward, we have to be very conscious of that no matter what we do. I mean, just a perfect example is, and I'm kind of piggybacking, going back to community a little bit, and if I may, just because I was thinking about it for just a minute, and with Symphony, for instance, it's sort of like the Met Gala of the West Coast. That was something that they were very, very proud about, but they recognized that the community would not be very responsive to that right now if they're going to have this sort of ultra glamorous event out on the streets, while people are still really kind of suffering. So they've dialed it back down and really included the community into how they plan their event for the year, and it's turning into sort of an outdoor adventure, and sort of taking a pulse on the community and like those touch points on how you learn information, one-on-one, and then take that also into digital learning and AI and technology. I mean, all of those things we're having to absorb and learn on the fly, if that makes sense. I mean, some people have been doing it for years, like Mike. So taking knowledge from him and people like him and people in those industries, and really just collaborating with a vast amount of people, sort of to ensure that you're really capturing all the data points that are necessary to host an event that's very inclusive and very sort of, I don't know, make sure that it's just on point and the message is clear all the way across. That's really a vague answer for the two questions that you answered. Sorry about that, Claire. I just sort of was stirring in my mind for a minute, so it took me a second.
No, I love that. That's what this is for. Did anybody else want to add to that?
Could I add something just before Mike finishes off? I think Mike's been in the game for a long time, but I feel like everyone here has come from physical events. And I think with the general industry, everyone's kind of like walking on eggshells because they just don't want to jeopardize, the delivery and things. And I think in general, the more responsibility we put in AI, the more critical its failure is. So I feel like everyone kind of goes into these things back foot, making sure that they can deliver above and beyond anything. Whereas, there's that playoff between needing to deliver a very inclusive and very tightened up deal towards something which is new and something which is breaking the boundaries. So it connotates to our own platform and to what Mike was saying about, trying something new. I think I'd hand it over to him there, just with that kind of insight that, it's kind of like everyone from physical has a little bit more wariness around them because it's an introduction, essentially.
I'll just
Mike,
add one thing. I agree with everything. So we're working with a technology client, a major technology client, and we're right now working on a virtual human, which is basically AI. There are several on Instagram who have millions of followers that aren't real people. They're 100% virtual. So it's very interesting working with that technology, working with their agents, right? Not a real person, but they have an agent, and navigating, how that new reality is going to work. Because, we live in a generation where, people who are graduating college have, had cell phones all their lives and have had social media all their lives. And what is reality right now? Perception is reality. I use that all the time with clients. Like their perception is our reality, right? So it's going to be interesting. We've all tried. We all know the games like World of Warcraft and Minecraft and Fortnite and the avatars, and I think it's going to. Again, we're not there yet. We're going to, in the next 5 or 10 years, get there, where you do have a digital presence, and you can choose whatever skin you want, whatever clothing you want, whatever weight you want, all those dynamics to represent yourself, and that's going to be a new reality. We're already, halfway there. So I'm not sure if that tail ends the question, but it's a brave new frontier, and I'm excited to see what the next 10 years looks like.
For sure. I know we want to get to the networking soon, but I want to ask one last question that's related. Someone asked what some virtual counterparts to in-person networking that you have that really stand out. Maybe a virtual counterpart to in-person one-on-one networking, anything other than chat features that have really stood out to you guys.
I can tackle this one.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, was that Heather?
Yeah, I will, because I think that a big part of our community is that networking piece. And we've tried a whole bunch of different technologies. And, we've tried Slack groups, we have our Mighty Networks platform. But I think one of our most successful was actually a speed networking event that we just hosted, where we did like one-on-ones with each person had a few minutes with a different individual. And I think that was really powerful, because we're so many times you're in these 6 boxes on screen or 8 boxes on screen, and we're not accounting for introverts and extroverts. So giving people one-on-one connection is super powerful. So that would be of all the events we tried, speed networking was one of the greatest recently.
That's a great idea. Anybody else want to chime in?
Oh, I had a quick build that is kind of in the spirit of what Heather was sharing, which for me, it's, when I reflect.
I was just going to say that the function.
Oh, Sean, I think you were overlapping. Judy, you want to finish your thought?
Oh, yes. I think for me, it's been less about the technology per se, and it's really around audience curation and like how we think about what those opportunities are. Because I think when there's a clear value exchange among the people who are networking, that's when I feel like it's really worked well. And it hasn't necessarily been about the technology. So kind of over the past year and a half, I think some of the groups that I've been a part of, whether it's, in the Asian American community, whether it's the marketing community, finding those like smaller circles have actually been incredibly beneficial. And I've learned a lot and really kind of, I feel hopefully contributed a lot as well as received a lot. So I think for me, it's less about the technology when you're not thinking about pure scale, like you had mentioned around chat functions. And it's really about creating value for all those who are involved.
For sure. Sean, did you want to finish us out?
I think Judy actually hit the nail on the head. I was just going to say that the functionality of networking and chat is always the same, but it's the logistics of how you manage people and how you get them there. It's always the indifference, and that's always the distinction between the offers. So I think she nailed it.
Well, I feel like I could chat another hour with each of you, but I'm trying to be conscious of everybody's time and attention spans, as we all discussed. This conversation has me so excited for the future of events. You are all incredible. I hope everybody checks out our web feature of the most innovative meetings to learn all about the amazing work this group is doing. And speaking of networking, to continue the conversation, I hope you all join us in the networking tables, which can be found at the top navigation bar of your screen. I'll be there. I believe some of our panelists will be there. Thank you again to our panelists and amazing partners for making today's event happen. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.